Welcome back. I'm Clara, your AI learning companion. Here's a strange question to start with. If you took 100 people, gave every single one of them the exact same income, the exact same number of working hours, and the exact same starting age of 25, why would 95 of them end up broke or barely scraping by while 5 of them ended up wealthy? It's not intelligence, it's not luck, not entirely. And it's definitely not how much money crossed their hands over a lifetime, because most people who struggle financially actually earn quite a lot of money over the course of their lives. They just don't keep any of it. Today we're breaking down a book that's nearly 100 years old but reads like it was written for someone scrolling financial advice on their phone right now. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon, written by George S. Clason, and it's one of the most quietly influential finance books ever published. The kind of book that doesn't go viral, but somehow ends up on the shelf of almost every self-made millionaire you've ever read about. The reason it's lasted this long isn't nostalgia. It's that Clason figured out something that modern finance books often bury under spreadsheets and jargon. Wealth isn't a math problem. It's a behavior problem. And behavior problems have surprisingly simple solutions if you're willing to actually follow them. By the end of this video, you'll understand the 5 core financial laws this book is built on. You'll see exactly how each one plays out with a concrete example, and you'll walk away with specific actions you can start today, not someday, not after you make more money first. Let's get into it. A quick word on the author. George Samuel Clason was an American businessman and writer in the early 20th century. He wasn't a banker or an economist. He ran an Atlas publishing company and later got into writing financial pamphlets that banks and insurance companies would distribute to customers as a kind of public service education. Those pamphlets were set in ancient Babylon, using parables about merchants, camel traders, and shrewd moneylenders to teach financial principles in a way that felt like storytelling rather than lecturing. Eventually, those pamphlets were collected into the book we know today. Why Babylon? Clason picked it deliberately. Ancient Babylon was, by historical record, one of the wealthiest cities of its era, a place with sophisticated trade, organized finance, and enough written record-keeping that we know its citizens dealt with budgets, loans, and savings in ways that aren't so different from us. Clason's argument was simple. Human nature around money hasn't changed in thousands of years. The tools have changed. We have banks instead of clay tablets, index funds instead of caravans. But the underlying behaviors that separate people who build wealth from people who don't are exactly the same now as they were in 2000 BCE. The problem Clason was trying to solve was this. Most people treat wealth like it's about income. Earn more, and your problems get fixed. But he'd observed, accurately it turns out, and modern research on lottery winners and high-income earners with no savings backs this up, that income and wealth are only loosely connected. People who earn modest amounts can become wealthy. People who earn enormous amounts can stay broke their entire lives. The difference lives in a handful of specific habits, which Clason distills into what are often called his laws of gold. We're going to walk through 5 of the most important ones, in the order the book builds them, each with a clear explanation, an example, and something you can act on immediately. The book opens with a man named Bansir, a chariot builder in ancient Babylon, who works hard, earns a decent living, and somehow always ends up with nothing left over. He goes to his old friend Arkad, who started in the exact same financial position as Bansir, but became the richest man in the city. Bansir asks the obvious question, "What did you figure out that I didn't?" Arkad's answer is almost insultingly simple, and that's the point. He says that out of every coin he earned, he kept at least 1/10 for himself before spending on anything else. Not after rent, not after groceries, not whatever's left at the end of the month. First. This sounds obvious today because so much modern financial advice has absorbed this idea, but it's worth sitting with why it actually works, because the mechanism matters more than the slogan. Most people structure their finances as income minus expenses equals savings. Whatever survives the gauntlet of bills, subscriptions, and impulse purchases is what gets saved. And for most people, that number is 0 or close to it, because expenses have a way of expanding to consume whatever income is available. This is sometimes called lifestyle inflation, and it's not a flaw in your willpower. It's a structural trap built into how most people set up their finances. Arcade's method flips the equation. Income minus savings equals expenses. The saving happens first, automatically, and you simply live on what's left. Your spending adjusts to fit the smaller number because spending is remarkably elastic. Humans are extremely good at making any amount of money feel necessary once it's available to spend. Here's an illustrative scenario to make this concrete. Imagine two people, both earning the same salary. One of them waits until the end of the month to see what's left over for savings, and almost every month something comes up. A dinner out, a sale, an unexpected expense, and the savings account stays empty. The other person sets up an automatic transfer the day their paycheck arrives, moving 10% straight into a separate account before they ever see the rest of the money in their checking account. A year later, the second person hasn't necessarily lived a noticeably more frugal life day to day, but they have a meaningful amount of money sitting untouched, simply because the decision to save was made once automatically instead of being relitigated every single month against the temptation to spend. The actionable step here is direct. Set up an automatic transfer of at least 10% of your income to a separate savings or investment account on the day you get paid before you do anything else with that money. If 10% feels impossible right now, start at 5 and build up. The amount matters less than the principle of paying yourself first automatically before the rest of your life gets a chance to claim that money. This next lesson directly addresses an objection a lot of people raise the moment they hear save 10% first. The objection sounds like, I don't have 10% to spare, I'm barely covering my basic needs as it is. Arcade's response to this in the book is sharp and a little provocative. He points out that what people call necessary expenses almost always expands to match whatever income is available, regardless of how much that income grows. Someone earning a modest income and someone earning triple that amount will both, without conscious intervention, report feeling like their expenses just barely cover their needs. This isn't a coincidence. It's a psychological pattern. As income rises, our sense of what counts as essential rises right along with it. Here's where the book gives a genuinely useful piece of practical advice, distinct from the previous lesson. It's not enough to just save first. You also need to actually sit down and distinguish between what you need to live and what you've simply gotten used to spending money on. The book frames this as separating necessary expenses from desires and pointing out that desires are essentially limitless. There will always be something new to want, while needs are actually fairly modest and finite. Consider this illustrative case. Imagine someone who gets a meaningful raise at work and feels genuinely excited, assuming this will finally give them breathing room. 6 months later, they look at their bank account and realize they're in exactly the same financial position as before the raise dikes, not because anything went wrong, but because their spending quietly absorbed the entire increase. A nicer apartment, eating out more often, upgraded subscriptions. None of these decisions individually seemed reckless, but collectively, they erase the raise as if it never happened. The lesson isn't deprive yourself of everything you enjoy. It's that your spending should be the result of deliberate decisions, not an automatic absorption of whatever income happens to be available. The book's suggestion is to actually write down your expenses on a regular basis, see them laid out plainly, and identify which ones you genuinely defend as necessary versus which ones simply crept in over time. The action item this week: write out every recurring expense you have: subscriptions, memberships, recurring habits like takeout coffee or food delivery, and for each one, ask honestly whether it's something you'd choose again if you were starting from scratch today. You don't have to cut everything. The point is conscious choice replacing automatic habit. Saving money is necessary, but on its own, it's incomplete. Arcade makes the point that money sitting idle is actually losing value over time relative to money that's productively invested, because every coin has the capacity to generate more coins if it's put to work, and every coin sitting still represents lost opportunity. This is the book's introduction to the idea of compounding, explained without any of the technical vocabulary modern finance uses, but capturing the essential mechanism perfectly. The parable Arcad uses involves lending money out and letting the interest or returns from that lending get reinvested rather than spent so that the pool of money grows on itself. Your gains start generating their own gains, which generate further gains, and the growth curve accelerates the longer it's left alone. To make this tangible, imagine two people who each manage to save the same amount of money by their late 20s. One keeps that money in a low-interest account, essentially just storing it. The other invests it in a way that earns a reasonable average return over time and, critically, reinvests any returns rather than spending them. Over a working lifetime, the gap between these two people isn't modest. It's enormous, and almost the entire difference comes not from how much they originally saved, but from how long their money was allowed to compound, and whether the returns were left in to keep growing or pulled out and spent. This is genuinely one of the most underappreciated ideas in personal finance, and it's worth being precise about why time matters so much more than most people intuitively believe. The growth from compounding isn't linear, it's closer to exponential, which means the majority of the total growth tends to happen in the later years of the timeline, not the early ones. This means a relatively small amount invested early can outperform a much larger amount invested late, simply because of how many years it had to compound. The practical implication is uncomfortable for procrastinators. The cost of waiting another 5 years to start investing isn't 5 years of lost growth. See, it's often closer to losing the most valuable 5 years of growth there were ever going to be. The book is also careful, through one of its other parables, to warn against impatience and recklessness disguised as ambition. There's a cautionary tale in the book about someone who, eager to grow money quickly, hands it to a smooth-talking acquaintance promising fast returns on a venture he knows nothing about and loses it all. The lesson paired with "make your money multiply" is don't hand your money to anyone whose competence and trustworthiness you can't actually verify, no matter how confident they sound. The action item: open an investment account if you don't already have one. For most people today, a simple, low-cost, diversified index fund is the modern equivalent of Arcad's principle, since it requires no special expertise and benefits enormously from time. Then commit to leaving the returns invested rather than withdrawing them, so the compounding effect can actually do its work. Right after teaching the principle of multiplying wealth, the book pivots to something that sounds contradictory at first, but is actually the necessary other half of the same coin: protecting your wealth from loss. This is where the cautionary parable about the failed venture becomes central. The character in question is persuaded to invest his savings into buying and reselling rare jewels, a business he knows absolutely nothing about, based purely on the enthusiasm and apparent confidence of the person pitching the idea to him. He's drawn in by the promise of returns that sound too good for the amount of effort required, and he never stops to ask the most basic question: does the person asking for my money actually have the expertise to deliver what they're promising? The result, predictably, is that the venture collapses and his savings are gone. The book's point here is not never take risks. Risk is an unavoidable part of investing, and the previous lesson already established that money needs to be put to work to grow. The point is that risk should be taken knowingly and with real diligence, not handed over to someone else's confidence and your own hope. Let's frame this with a more contemporary illustrative example. Imagine someone who's accumulated a solid amount in savings and is approached by an acquaintance pitching a new opportunity: a new cryptocurrency project, a multi-level marketing scheme, a guaranteed trading strategy, promising returns far beyond what conventional investments offer. The pitch is full of confidence, urgency, and social proof. Other people are apparently already in and doing well. Someone who has internalized this lesson asks a different set of questions before committing money. What do I actually understand about how this generates returns? What happens to my money if this fails? Is the person asking for my trust qualified, and can I verify that independently of what they're telling me? If the honest answers are not much, I lose everything, and no, that's the signal to walk away, regardless of how compelling the pitch sounds. The book also touches on a related and very practical idea: getting advice from people who are actually skilled in the relevant area rather than trusting your own untested instincts or the confidence of an unqualified acquaintance. Arkad's broader teaching is to seek counsel from those with proven experience in a specific field before committing money to it, rather than assuming good intentions are a substitute for expertise. The action item: before putting money into any investment or opportunity that promises unusually high returns, write down in plain language exactly how the return is supposedly generated, and ask yourself honestly whether you could explain that mechanism to someone else. If you can't, that's your answer. Don't invest until you genuinely understand what you're investing in, or get advice from someone qualified and independent of the person promoting it. The fifth major lesson is really two closely linked ideas the book treats together: the value of owning rather than renting your living space when it's financially feasible, and the importance of deliberately providing for periods of your life when you may not be earning old age, illness, or unexpected circumstance. On the first point, the book makes an argument that, translated to a modern context, goes something like this: money spent on rent is money that produces no lasting asset for you. It covers a need, but it builds nothing. Money directed instead toward owning your home, even gradually through a structured payment plan, builds equity over time, which is itself a form of compounding, just expressed through property rather than financial investment. There's also a psychological dimension Arkad touches on. Owning your home tends to reduce certain ongoing expenses and creates a sense of stability that, in turn, makes other financial discipline easier to maintain. It's worth being balanced here, because modern financial circumstances are more varied than they were in Clason's framing. Homeownership isn't universally the optimal financial decision in every market or every life stage, and there are legitimate scenarios where renting and investing, the difference outperforms ownership. But the underlying principle generalizes well beyond housing specifically. Wherever possible, direct your spending toward things that build an asset for you over time, rather than things that simply disappear the moment the money is spent. That could be property, but it could also be a paid-off vehicle versus a perpetual lease, or equity in a small business versus paying someone else's salary indefinitely. The second half of this lesson is about preparing for the future you can't fully predict. The book frames this through the idea of ensuring an income in later life and protecting your family in the event you're no longer able to provide for them, essentially the ancient equivalent of retirement planning and insurance. Arkad's reasoning is that a person's ability to earn is not permanent, and someone who hasn't planned ahead of time for the years when that earning capacity declines is gambling their entire future on the assumption that nothing will ever interrupt their income. Here's an illustrative scenario worth sitting with. Imagine two people in their 40s. Both have been earning steadily and comfortably for 2 decades. One has spent that entire time directing all surplus income toward visible lifestyle upgrades, with no structured plan for retirement or unexpected disruption. The other has, alongside enjoying their life, consistently built a retirement account and maintained appropriate insurance coverage. If both of them experience an unexpected health event or job loss in their 50s, their experiences of that event will be radically different, not because one of them was unlucky and the other lucky, but because one of them built a buffer against the predictable unpredictability of life and one didn't. The action item here is twofold. First, if home ownership is financially realistic for your circumstances and market, treat it as a long-term wealth-building decision rather than purely a lifestyle one, and start working toward it deliberately. Second, regardless of your age, check that you have some structured plan in place for the years when you may not be able to earn, a retirement account that's actually being contributed to, and insurance coverage appropriate to your situation. If you don't have either of these in place yet, treat opening them as more urgent than it feels, because the cost of starting late compounds just as painfully as the benefit of starting early. Before we move to the action plan, it's worth stepping back and noticing what ties all 5 of these lessons together, because it's not actually about money at all, not primarily. Every single one of these laws is really a law about delayed gratification and deliberate decision-making applied to the specific arena of personal finance. Pay yourself first is delaying the gratification of spending the full paycheck. Controlling expenditures is delaying the gratification of letting desires expand unchecked. Making your money multiply is delaying the gratification of spending returns instead of reinvesting them. Guarding against loss is delaying the gratification of a quick, exciting win in favor of a verified, sound one. And building ownership and provision for the future is delaying the gratification of present comfort in favor of long-term security. Clason's deeper insight, buried under the parable structure, is that wealth was never really about access to opportunity or even raw financial intelligence. It was about whether someone had built the internal discipline to consistently choose the longer, less immediately satisfying path. And that's actually good news, because intelligence and opportunity are largely outside your control. But discipline, while difficult, is something you can deliberately build through repetition, exactly the way you'd build a physical habit. Let's bring this all together into something you can actually start using today, because understanding these ideas intellectually is very different from putting them into motion. Step 1. Automate your savings before you spend a single dollar of your next paycheck. Set up a transfer of at least 10%, now 5 if that's genuinely all you can manage right now, moving automatically into a separate account the moment your income arrives. Don't rely on willpower at the end of the month. Remove the decision entirely. Step 2. Take 15 minutes this week to write out your recurring expenses and honestly sort them into what you need and what you've simply grown used to. You're not committing to cut anything yet. You're just building awareness, because you can't make deliberate choices about money you've never actually looked at clearly. Step 3. Before your next financial decision involving meaningful money, an investment, a major purchase, an opportunity someone's pitching you, ask yourself the question our COD would ask. Do I actually understand how this works? And am I confident in the judgment of anyone I'm trusting with this decision? If the answer is no to either, slow down before you commit. Here's your homework, and I want you to actually do this one, not just nod along. Tonight, before you go to bed, set up that automatic transfer, just the first one. Don't wait for a better month, a bigger paycheck, or more financial knowledge. Our COD himself started with almost nothing, and the entire premise of this book is that the system matters more than the starting amount. What strikes me most about this book, even with everything that's changed about money in the last 100 years, currencies, technology, entire financial systems, is that the core human behaviors it describes haven't moved an inch. We still struggle with the same impulse to spend what's in front of us, the same temptation to chase quick wins over sound ones, and the same tendency to assume tomorrow will sort itself out without a plan. The 5 laws in this book aren't clever tricks. They're closer to a mirror, showing you exactly which habits separate drifting through your financial life from deliberately building one. If this breakdown gave you something worth acting on, consider subscribing. I'm building out a whole library of these deep, no-fluff book breakdowns, and I genuinely love to have you along for the next one. Until then, I'm Clara. Go set up that transfer.